It's rare for a story to stick with people for over 2 decades, but Fullmetal Alchemist did just that and more, because what began as a manga in 2001 turned into something bigger, a cultural touchstone in the anime world. Today, it's streaming on major platforms, inspiring new adaptations, and also making room for fresh stories from Hiromu Arakawa, its creator. Whether you're a longtime fan of Fullmetal Alchemist or just discovering it, there's no better time to revisit its legacy and look ahead to what's next. We're ready to get into it, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we do have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Origins, manga, and early success. Before it was 2 different anime with 2 different endings, Fullmetal Alchemist began as a manga by Hiromu Arakawa, which was first published in Monthly Shonen Gangan in July 2001. It tells the story of 2 brothers, Edward and Alphonse Elric, who commit a terrible mistake and spend the rest of the series trying to fix it. What started as a gripping, emotionally layered manga quickly turned into a massive cultural phenomenon. In a world where alchemy is real and practiced science, the Elric brothers try to bring their mother back to life using forbidden transmutation as the primary premise. But they had to pay a price. That's the thing about alchemy, is that there has to be an exchange. Ed lost his arm and a leg, but Al lost his entire body, and Ed manages to bind his soul to a suit of armor. From that moment on, their goal is to recover what they've lost. The only way to do that was to find the Philosopher's Stone, a legendary alchemical artifact with the power to override the law of equivalent exchange. What made Fullmetal Alchemist stand out from the start was how fully realized the world was. Amestris, the country they live in, is a militaristic state with deep political corruption, civil war in its recent past, and hidden secrets underneath its structured laws. Ed and Al were navigating a world where power was always tied to sacrifice, where every shortcut came at a cost, and where the truth behind the Philosopher's Stone was more horrifying than they ever imagined. Arakawa's world building was meticulous. She combined early 20th century European aesthetics with steampunk elements and layered political commentary, and she never lost sight of her characters, because no matter how big the world became, the story always came back to Ed and Al's bond, their guilt, and their hope. Every decision they made was driven by the love they had for each other and the weight of what they had done. The manga was a commercial as well as critical success. The series sold millions of copies worldwide and consistently ranked among the top-selling titles in Japan as it progressed through the 2000s. Arakawa's artwork also transformed significantly over the course of the series, where early chapters had a more comedic, lighthearted tone, but the stakes obviously rose with the intensity and detail in her art. At the time of its conclusion in 2010, the manga had run for nearly a decade, totaling 27 volumes. It was widely regarded as one of the best-written shonen stories of its era, standing alongside giants like Naruto, One Piece, and Bleach, but with a distinct tone and structure that helped it appeal to a broader audience. It had a clear beginning, middle, and end, instead of depending on filler arcs. It wrapped up all of its themes like grief, redemption, humanity, and sacrifice in a satisfying and meaningful way. This strong foundation was part of why Fullmetal Alchemist went on to get 2 anime adaptations, both of which would take very different approaches to telling the Elric brothers' story. But before we even start the debate over which version was better or more true to the source material, there was just the manga, which had a focused, character-driven, and tightly plotted story that earned its reputation through sheer narrative strength. It's rare for a series to strike a balance between action, philosophy, and emotional storytelling so effectively, and even rarer for one to do it while delivering a complete, cohesive arc from start to finish. That's the legacy Arakawa set in motion when Fullmetal Alchemist first hit the page. The first anime, 2003, Manga Divergence. The first Fullmetal Alchemist anime aired back in October 2003, made by Studio Bones. At the time, the manga by Hiromu Arakawa had just started picking up steam, and it was nowhere near finished. So, while the show started off pretty faithful, it eventually had to take its own route. Around the halfway point, the anime caught up to the manga, and from there, with Arakawa's okay, the studio came up with its own original storyline and ending. Up until episode 25, it stuck closely to the source material. You still had the heartbreaking Nina Tucker arc, the Ishval flashbacks, Scar's introduction. Those early storylines were all in there. Ed and Al set off on their journey to find the Philosopher's Stone to get their bodies back, and along the way, they ran into heavy moral choices and started to really understand the price of alchemy. The story began to shift once the anime passed the available manga content. Instead of the manga's long-term antagonist, Father, the anime introduced Dante, a new character written specifically for this version. Dante was once Hohenheim's partner. After learning the secret of the Philosopher's Stone, she began transferring her soul into new bodies to escape death. She also manipulated events from the shadows, using the homunculi and the military to maintain control in order to keep herself alive. The homunculi were rewritten too. In the manga, they are fragments of Father's plan, tied to his attempt to recreate God. In the 2003 anime, they are the failed results of human transmutation, each one created when someone tried to resurrect a loved one. For example, Lust in the anime is the failed transmutation of Scar's brother's lover. Wrath is Izumi's lost son. These versions gave the homunculi more emotional weight, but also detached them from the wider conspiracy that Arakawa was building in the manga. Mid to late episodes changed the trajectory of the story. The anime moved towards a conclusion centered on Dante's manipulation and the consequences of using Philosopher's Stones instead of following the slow unraveling of Father's plans. Characters were also written in new directions. For example, Mustang's arc in the anime focuses less on political reform and more on his personal losses. The anime version of Scar also plays a different role, sacrificing himself to create a Philosopher's Stone and triggering major changes to the timeline. By the final episodes, the story becomes more introspective. Edward uncovers the truth about Dante's identity and her control over the homunculi. He's killed by envy when he tries to stop her. Al, in an act of desperation, sacrifices himself to bring Ed back. This causes Edward to be pulled through the gate of truth and dropped into our real-world 1920s Germany, where he wakes up in the middle of post-World War I Europe. In return, Al is restored to his human body with no memory of their journey. The anime ends with the brothers split across different worlds. Al is back in Amestris while Ed is trapped in Germany. Neither of them knows how to reach the other. The final scene shows Ed boarding a train, determined to find a way back home. It's deliberately an unresolved ending, setting up the 2005 film Conqueror of Shambhala, which acts as a conclusion to this timeline. The 2003 anime was praised for its emotional depth, but the divergence confused many fans. With a different villain, altered character arcs, and a completely original ending, it had left the audience wondering how much of it matched Arakawa's original intent. A second adaptation became inevitable when the manga later continued on a very different path. Brotherhood and manga finale, giving the fans closure. By the time Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood aired in 2009, the manga was almost completed. Unlike the 2003 anime, Brotherhood set out to adapt Hiromu Arakawa's original story from start to finish. With 64 episodes, it followed the manga's exact structure and tone, which was character-driven, focused, and carefully paced. It corrected the timeline divergence of the earlier adaptation and gave fans the ending they had been waiting for. The core premise remained the same. Edward and Alphonse Elric continued their search for the Philosopher's Stone in order to revert their bodies as a result of a failed transmutation. But in Brotherhood, the larger mystery was the truth about the stone, the homunculi, and the military, which slowly unfolded into a much broader conspiracy involving the entire nation of Amestris. Instead of Dante, the villain this time was Father, an immortal being who had once been a homunculus created from a flask. Having escaped from Xerxes centuries ago, he aimed to achieve godhood by absorbing the power of truth, using the entire population of Amestris as a sacrifice. To do this, he created the homunculi as extensions of himself. Each was named after a deadly sin. As the story progressed, every major character got a complete arc. Roy Mustang pursued justice for the Ishvalan genocide and lost his eyesight after being forced to open the Gate of Truth. Scar, once a violent extremist, ended up helping bring down the corrupt regime. Ling Yao, a prince from Xing, sought immortality and ended up hosting greed. The homunculi were revealed to be deeply connected to Father's plan, and one by one they fell. The final battle began during the Promised Day, which was a massive coordinated attack across the country. The military turned against King Bradley. The citizens rose up, and deep beneath Central, the main characters faced Father, who was now in possession of godlike power after absorbing the souls of Amestris. One by one, his plans unraveled as this power could not be sustained. Alphonse was severely injured in the fight. In the final moments, Edward had a choice of sacrificing something of great personal value at the Gate of Truth to bring his brother back. He chose to give up his ability to perform alchemy. That exchange returned Alphonse's body and soul fully restored. Ed lost his alchemy forever, but finally kept the promise he had made at the start of the story. With Father defeated and the Philosopher's Stone destroyed, the story moved into its epilogue. Roy Mustang began work on reforming the military. Ling returned to Xing with Greed's memories, planning to unify by his people, and the Elric brothers went home. 2 years later, Edward left on a journey to learn more about the world without alchemy. Alphonse followed his own path of study. They were ready to go in different directions in the last scene, however, there was a mutual awareness that they were going to live and eventually meet again. The series ended with a full resolution. Characters lived with their choices and arcs came to a close. The long-running question of whether the brothers could restore what was lost was answered with clarity. Brotherhood delivered what many anime adaptations don't, which is a complete and faithful retelling of a manga with a solid earned conclusion. Where the 2003 anime leaned into ambiguity and tragedy, Brotherhood stayed aligned with Arakawa's intent, which focused on sacrifice and growth. For fans who followed the story from the beginning, Brotherhood gave them closure that the first anime couldn't. The 2003 ending, unresolved fates, and movie closure. The 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime ended in a way that surprised many viewers. The final episodes pushed the Elric brothers into new physical and emotional territory. It had to find its own conclusion, with the series diverging from the manga in its second half. In the final episodes, Edward learns the truth about Dante, the true identity behind the homunculi, and the nature of the Philosopher's Stone. Scar sacrifices himself to create the stone, using the lives of the Ishvalan people. Alphonse becomes its vessel. Ed is killed by envy in a moment of desperation, but Al responds by using the stone's power to bring his brother back. That act erases Al completely, and he disappears from existence. When Ed is revived, he immediately performs another alchemic transmutation. This time, he offers his own life in exchange for Alphonse's body and soul. As a result, Ed is sent beyond the Gate of Truth and wakes up in an alternate version of Earth, specifically 1920s Germany, right after World War I. Meanwhile, back in Amestris, Al has been restored to his 10-year-old self with no memory of anything that happened. The brothers are now alive but separated across two entirely different realities. The anime ends with this separation intact. While it concludes the story in terms of action and major character arcs, it leaves the emotional core, Ed and Al's reunion, unresolved, which led to some mixed reactions. Some fans appreciated the emotional weight, others felt it lacked closure. In 2005, Studio Bones released a sequel film titled Fullmetal Alchemist: Conqueror of Shambhala. It picks up 2 years after the end of the anime. Edward is still in Munich, now living with a man called Alphonse Heydrich, an alternate version of Alphonse from that universe. He's working with German scientists and inventors during a time of political unrest while searching for a way back to his own world. On the other side, Alphonse has been studying alchemy and is determined to reunite with his brother. Using ancient texts, he figures out how to open a gateway between the different worlds. At the same time, a group of occultists from our world, the Thule Society, wants to reach Amestris to exploit its power, which brings both brothers into conflict with figures from both worlds, including alternate versions of familiar characters like Hughes and Tucker. Eventually, the gateway between the two worlds is opened. Ed and Al fight side by side once more, even though it's brief. After stopping the Thule Society, they make a choice. Rather than risk the two worlds colliding or being used again, they decide to stay in our world, Germany, with the gate permanently closed. The movie ends with the Elric brothers reunited. They're far from home and without alchemy, which is technically a resolution. Many fans felt the setting shift towards real-world history was jarring, but others believe the story didn't fully answer key questions or carry the same emotional impact as the manga's ending. While Conqueror of Shambhala gave the 2003 anime a definitive endpoint, it still felt disconnected from the tone and structure of Arakawa's work. It remained a separate continuity, which was more experimental and more ambiguous. Compared to the tight conclusion of Brotherhood, the 2003 timeline left viewers with a different kind of ending, which was shaped by sacrifice and separation rather than fulfillment. Streaming, legacy, and remakes. After years of DVD and Blu-ray sales, both the 2003 anime and Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood found new audiences through Netflix, Crunchyroll, and other services. Brotherhood in particular became one of the most rewatched and recommended anime on those platforms. Casual audiences and longtime fans rewatched the show and rekindled their interest in it and its characters. For many, Brotherhood became their gateway into anime. Its clean animation, focused storytelling, and complete arc made it accessible in a way that many other long-running series just aren't. In 2017, a live-action adaptation was produced in Japan, focusing on the early chapters of the manga. It received a divided response, but it reminded people about the original work. There were 2 follow-up live-action films, The Revenge of Scar and The Final Alchemy, which dealt with what came afterwards in the manga. These versions were more loyal and were introduced worldwide on Netflix, extending the story of the franchise across the world. By 2025, the franchise was still part of the larger anime conversation. Brotherhood remains one of the highest-rated anime on platforms like MyAnimeList and IMDb. It frequently charted best-of lists and was largely cited as the perfect example of how to adapt a manga properly. Hiromu Arakawa, the creator of the original manga, has also remained active. In recent years, she began work on a new anime project with the same animation studio that produced Brotherhood, further fueling speculation about possible spin-offs or returns to the Fullmetal Alchemist universe. Fans have been waiting patiently since the obvious need is there, yet no official continuation has been announced. The longevity of Fullmetal Alchemist has been because of its completeness. Brotherhood gave viewers a beginning, middle, and end with emotional weight and narrative payoff. The 2003 version was more experimental, but still, it hits the note with fans who appreciate its tone and focus on characters. Collectively, they are a unique example of the franchise that succeeded under dual versions. More than 20 years later, Fullmetal Alchemist is still being watched, talked about, and shared every day. What's next? Creator Arakawa's new projects. In 2021, Hiromu Arakawa launched a new manga called Demons of the Shadow Realm, Yomi no Tsugai, which is set in a rural mountain village and follows a pair of twins, Yuru and Asa. Their lives take a turn when Asa is taken away and Yuru discovers secrets about the external world. Their story is tied to supernatural entities called Tsugai, each linked to powerful forces that exist in secret. From the beginning, the series drew attention for its familiar strengths of tight pacing, complex sibling dynamics, and high-stakes moral questions. The emotional core is similar to Fullmetal Alchemist, even though the setting and rules are different. It's a fantasy story, but it stays focused on people and their relationships. By 2025, Demons of the Shadow Realm had gained a steady following. The next step came during July's Anime Expo, where Studio Bones officially announced an anime adaptation. This is the same team behind Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, who are returning to work with Arakawa more than 15 years later, which alone got people talking. The teaser released at Anime Expo didn't give much away, but the animation style and tone felt immediately familiar. It showed glimpses of the twins, a few Tsugai battles, and short flashes of rural landscapes and military interiors, suggesting a story that will span different environments and layers of conflict. The anime doesn't have a release date yet, but fans are looking forward to it closely. For longtime followers of Arakawa's work, this project feels like the natural next step. It's a return to a style of storytelling that balances world building with grounded emotional character arcs. And with the same studio involved, expectations are high. The studio has a reputation for handling action and emotion well, which they already understand with the rhythm of Arakawa's writing. The announcement also landed at the right time, with Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood still streaming on major platforms and new fans discovering the series every year. There's already renewed attention on her work. Demons of the Shadow Realm could easily find a wide audience, both from returning fans and people coming in fresh. What happens next depends on how the anime handles the source material, but it's clear Arakawa still has stories worth telling and an audience ready to hear them. Marvelous verdict! At the end of the day, both Fullmetal Alchemist and Brotherhood left a lasting impression in different ways. The 2003 series took creative risks with a darker, original story that still resonates with a lot of viewers, and Brotherhood stayed true to the manga and delivered a more complete, emotionally grounded finale. With Arakawa working on a new series and Studio Bones returning to adapt her latest work, it's a good time to be a fan. Let us know what you thought of the finale or what you're hoping to see next from Arakawa or the Fullmetal Alchemist series. As always, if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for sticking around and we'll catch you in the next one. Until then, stay curious and stay marvelous.